Welcome to Marketplace Tech Bytes, our weekly review of a few of the big stories making headlines across the industry. I'm Stephanie Hughes. This week, the U.S. warns the global community against excessive AI regulation at Paris Summit. Apple unveils a major health study in its research app. And BuzzFeed is launching a new social media platform called BF Island. Joining me to talk about this is Jewel Burks-Solomon, managing partner at Collab Capital. Hey, Jewel.
Hey, Stephanie.
So we're going to start with our bite of the week. This is one number that gives some context about what's going on in tech. Jewel, what's your number?
My bite of the week this week is 60, and that is the number of countries that signed on to a declaration which emphasized inclusive and sustainable AI at this week's Paris AI Action Summit.
Yes, I guess my bite would be one, which is the U.S., one of the countries that did not sign on to this. So that's our first story. Let's get to it. So government leaders, academics, and tech CEOs gathered this week in Paris at the Artificial Intelligence Action Summit. It's kind of like a who's who of big names in AI and government. The summit's 2 years old. I think this is the third one they've had. And French President Emmanuel Macron reportedly said it should be about creating rules of the game, that AI cannot be the Wild West. But the country that's home to the actual Wild West is interested in forging ahead. Here's U.S. Vice President JD Vance speaking at the summit.
When conferences like this convene to discuss a cutting-edge technology, oftentimes I think our response is to be too self-conscious, too risk-averse. But never have I encountered a breakthrough in tech that so clearly calls us to do precisely the opposite.
Jewel, you're an investor with an interest in AI. You've got some investments in AI startups. When you hear this kind of speech on a global stage where the message is basically hit the gas, don't worry too much if the brakes work, how does it shape your thinking?
Well, on the one hand, I think obviously AI is a super exciting area for investors. We're finding a lot of great opportunities. There's a lot of innovation. It's moving so fast. And so I understand the position to forge ahead and not get too bogged down with regulation. But on the other hand, there are so many companies, so many people who are building. It's really important that there is some level of uniformity and regulation across borders as it relates to this innovation. So I think it's personally a little bit scary and disappointing that we couldn't get on board with the other 60 plus companies or countries that signed on to some sort of basic rules of the road here. But I think there's probably a lot of investors who are excited about the position that JD Vance and the current administration have taken, which is kind of a hands-off position and letting the companies decide what their guardrails are going to be.
Yeah, what does this say about global governance in this space? Does it mean that AI companies are just gonna do their thing?
It feels that way. It seems like, at least from the U.S. perspective, there is a desire to let companies sort of do their thing, and it's obviously probably very much directed by some of the folks who were at the inauguration and have a huge role to play. And think about the Sam Altmans and the Elon Musk of the world who are really guiding the big companies in this area. And it also has to do with our perspective and desire to remain sort of the America First AI strategy, where we obviously over the last few weeks have seen that there are major players in China who are, potentially just as competitive as some of our major players here. And so we want to remain as competitive as possible, keep our dominance in this area. And I think the perspective is that we can only do that with, less regulation than more.
Yeah, it is interesting. I will say there's some new money for AI development. The EU says it's putting more than $200 billion towards helping the European tech sector catch up with the US and China. What does that mean for us consumers in terms of possible future AI products? Like more money could mean more good products?
That's the optimistic view, more good products. I think the pessimistic view would be that there's obviously a lot of implications across the board around AI. It means that there's potentially job loss in terms of what people can do. There's obviously folks who are going to have to think more deeply about the fields that they get into as AI continues to do jobs that humans are now doing. There's considerations from an environmental perspective. So without regulation in terms of what the outputs and implications are for the development of AI, the data centers, the energy costs, all of these things, I would say we need some level of international alignment around. But we'll continue to watch and track what happens in this space.
Yeah. Okay, so let's move to our next topic. Apple is unveiling a major health study in its research app. So Apple announced this week that it's launching a joint health study with Brigham and Women's Hospital, a research hospital. iPhone users can opt in to participate in the study on the research app. The company is going to collect data from across different consumer tech devices like your phones and earbuds, and the goal is to find patterns in participants' health. Joel, what do you think we might see come out of this study?
I think the study is pretty interesting and exciting, mostly because of the fact that they can collect data over so many people and across so many different activity levels and different patterns. So typically with studies, you're talking about small groups, you're talking about potentially not having diversity in the participants. But when you think about iPhone users who can opt into the study, you're talking about maybe hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people who can potentially opt in and give data around what they're doing. So these participants, obviously, they'll opt in, they will periodically answer survey questions, and Apple will track a lot of the data across their activities. And the potential is that we'll learn a ton about how these different things like aging, hearing, cognition, mobility, how they all work together. And, I think it'll help Apple to create some great new products and innovation as a result.
Yeah. I mean, so Apple could take this research and add health features to its consumer tech that people like. I could see this being good for health research overall, but is it also good for Apple?
It's great for Apple. They'll have so much information and can make really good decisions about what their customers need. They can also serve, different products based on what they find in this research. So I think it's a great business move, and hopefully they'll take the data and given that they're partnering with Brigham and Women's Hospital, hopefully it will lead to some good discoveries and hopefully innovation that will be supportive of better health outcomes across the board.
Yeah. This comes as the Trump administration is possibly restricting funding to the National Institutes of Health. What does it mean to have a possible reduction in public funding of health research while companies are forging ahead?
It's could be challenging. I think that NIH has done great work to make sure that there is some level of equity across, what folks are getting from a health delivery and outcomes perspective. I think when we look at the private or public sector companies coming in and maybe closing a gap in this area, again, what we get on the positive side is Apple has so many users spanning so many different backgrounds. And so when we think about their ability to cross-examine across very deep data sets and huge and diverse data sets, there's a possibility that the outcomes could be even better than what NIH could do with more restricted budgets. So that's on the positive side. We'll see if they're using this as force for good. And hopefully being very transparent as far as how they're using the data and people's ability to opt in and out of these studies.
Yeah. Okay, so let's move to our last story. BuzzFeed is launching a social media platform called BF Island. You may have gone to BuzzFeed in the past for listicles or quizzes or a dose of celebrity gossip. It's had a rough few years, but now BuzzFeed is developing its own social media platform called BF Island, possibly BuzzFeed Island. Here's BuzzFeed CEO Jonah Peretti speaking with Recode about what it's meant to be like.
It will be a lot of co-creation, a lot of using AI tools to make things and play with other people and create with other people.
Brady has also said he wants the platform to keep truth and joy alive. This seems like both a lovely idea and also incredibly challenging. Jewel, as an investor, if someone came to you and pitched this idea, what questions would you ask?
I would have a lot of questions for sure. I think that, it sounds great to have a social media platform dedicated to joy and vibes and co-creation. That all sounds really nice. I think that it's a little bit harder in practice. Jonah Peretti in his memo about this talked about how, he could sort of railed against how the current social media platforms are proliferating what he calls snarf, stakes, novelty, anger, retention, and fear. And anyone who spends time on the current, dominant social platforms can probably agree that there's a lot of anger on there these days. So I like the idea that they have of spreading more joy and doing things with more collaborative and co-creation and using AI in those ways. It sounds great, but feels like it's very early in the process and pretty interesting that they're announcing it before it's sort of ready to launch.
Right. It's more of a thought possibly than a place yet. So I will say in the past year or so, I've created new accounts on Mastodon, Blue Sky, Threads. If other people are like me, they might be casting around a little bit to find a new social media platform. What sort of a moment are we in with social media, and what kind of opportunity is there for companies like BuzzFeed?
Yeah, I think you're right. People are maybe getting a little fatigued at all of the different social platforms out there and not exactly finding what they're looking for. It's interesting that they're calling this an island because I think people probably want a bit of a vacation from the social platforms that currently exist. So at least they have that going. But, I think people are really looking for community. I think people are lonely in even though we have all of these social media platforms, people aren't necessarily finding that supportive community that they may have found when they first got on, Instagram or Facebook for the first time. And so I think the idea again of having something where you can find your community, you can find like-minded people, you can find joy, you can find fun. All of those are things that people are looking for. I'm seeing more social media platforms pop up that are really specific to certain communities. So maybe this can be a place like that where people can find some refuge from what's currently happening on the dominant social media platforms.
What's happening on the internet? Is there one element of BuzzFeed that you'd like to see on the platform? For me, it would be I enjoy a good listicle.
Yeah, I was gonna say, the listicles of back in the day, they were pretty fun. I think BuzzFeed did a great job of bringing that light sort of humor to the internet. So hopefully that is a key factor in BuzzFeed Island as well.
Jewel Burks Solomon is with Collab Capital. Jewel, thank you so much for talking with me.
Thank you.
And thanks to all of you for joining us for Marketplace Tech Bytes Week in Review. Daniel Shin produced this episode. I'm Stephanie Hughes. This is APM.